Thank you all for coming. I'm very excited to be here. And as Lisa said, for the next hour, I just want to take you on a journey through the wonderful world of market research. And just to give you a quick run-through of the session. So I'll start with a bit of introduction, and I'll talk a little bit about my background and how I ended up working in a market research agency. And then I want to spend some time to really dive in the whole field of market research, what it involves, the types of methods that we use, the research process and how that looks like. And then I put together a few case studies to show you some of the projects that we've done recently and how we decided to use certain methods and how we use them in practice. And then I want to show you as well some examples of outputs that we delivered to our clients. And then, because market research is not only about the hard work, it's also about the fun, I also want to give you some examples of the perks that you have if you work in a market research agency. And then there will be time for questions at the end. So let's kick things off with some introductions first. So my journey into research started a long, long time ago. So I started with an undergraduate degree at the University of Bucharest, where I studied international relations and European studies. In my second year at university, I was given the opportunity to go on an Erasmus exchange program. And I chose to go to the Netherlands in the south, to Hogeschool Zout, which was an eye-opening experience on so many levels, but it really opened up my appetite for studying abroad even more. And that's why I decided to apply for a master's degree in social sciences at University of Amsterdam. And I completed that program successfully, and by the end, I knew research was something that I wanted to do forever. But unfortunately, it still took a few more years until I really found my path. So I did a few non-research related jobs, from like working in the reception of a hotel all the way to working for a Microsoft contractor, so really non-research stuff. And then I ended up working back in academia as a research assistant for Trinity College Dublin. And I thought I had landed my dream job, where I was working on a one-year-long project on the needs of international students, which was really interesting, but I still felt that there was something missing. It was almost like I needed more warmth. I needed something to be a bit more dynamic in my day-to-day work. And then, for personal reasons, I relocated to Manchester, and then by pure accident, while looking up research positions in Manchester, I came across various market research agencies. So it really took a Google search in the UK to actually find out about market research as a field where you can work. So I started for a few months with another agency, and then in May 2016, I applied for a job at Mustard, where I started as a research executive. So that's the most entry-level position that you can start on. And then I slowly worked my way to a research manager position at the beginning of this year. And the reason why I wanted to take you on this journey of mine is that at no point, people don't really talk about market research as something that you can do as a career pathway. So you really have to find it out on your own, even if like, you sometimes don't even know what to look for. So I spoke with a lot of my colleagues in the industry, and everybody seems to be landing a market research job by pure accident. You just even meet someone who knows someone, but nobody really talks about you can also do this as a researcher. So that's why I was really happy when Lisa invited me today, because what I really want to do is really bring market research closer to students, so that at least you'll know that this is also a field where you can pursue your research dream. And it's safe to say that this journey for me lasted over 10 years. So it took a while until I found my path. So I really hope that people won't spend as long as I did if they want to end up working as researchers in a market research agency. Right, so what is market research then, apart from the severe consumption of tea and coffee that we're all guilty of in the office? Let's start with the definition. So the Market Research Society defines market research as the collection, use, or analysis of information about individuals or organizations intended to establish facts, acquire knowledge, or reach conclusions. Now, there are a few key terms here, and if we take them one by one, we'll really be able to understand the field as a whole. So let's start dissecting this definition a bit. We first have the collection, use, or analysis of information. And this means that basically you have a series of research questions that you need to answer. And then either there is no data available, which means that you have to go out there in field and collect your data, or there is already data available in the form of secondary data or pre-existing data on record, and you can use that. And we're now actually moving towards a stage where we almost like suffer from data overload. So there is so much data held that it's actually one of the main needs of our clients is to be able to make sense of the data that they already have rather than go out there and collect even more data. The way we can do this is we can either do this on an ad hoc basis, so it's almost like a one-off project. You do it, you close it, and that's it. Or we can do it on a continuous basis where we track perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors over time. So for example, I work on a project where we do tracking research for a lot of the theme parks here in the UK. And there's 3 times a year in April, August, and October, we do the same type of research to make sure that if anything happened in terms of perceptions and attitudes, we'll be able to catch those on time and report back to the client. So there's 2 different ways, either ad hoc research or continuous research. Now, the second part of this definition talks about individuals or organizations, or in market research language, that's consumer research versus B2B research or business-to-business research. So one of our main target groups is formed by individuals or consumers. We study, we explore, we describe their behaviors, their perceptions, their needs, their desires, anything that's related to consumers. And we can do that for clients from the private sector, which are providers of goods and services, or for clients from the public sector or from the third sector, which is charities. So again, providers of goods and services, or when it comes to governmental institutions developing certain campaigns or developing certain policies, that's when you also conduct market research to test the market or test the campaigns. Now, the second main group that we research are organizations or businesses, and that's where the B2B comes from. And in this instance, we seek the views of people, but we seek the views of people as in their role within an organization and as consumers of business products or business services. So for example, we do a lot of research for lawyers who are business consumers, so they're interested in, for example, certain courses, or we do research with medical professionals interested in buying professional insurance, or we do research with people working in a bank. So we study them as consumers, but they're consumers of business products and business services. And I'll give you more examples about that as we go. And then we do all these things as the definition states to establish facts, to acquire knowledge, or to reach conclusions. Now, there are several groups that are involved in the whole field of market research. And the first one is formed by our clients. So as I said, they're either from the private sector, public, or third sector, and they are the ones who commission research. So they've identified a problem within their business, they've identified a problem with their consumers, they've identified an area that they want to explore, and that's when they put together a fieldwork brief and they commission research agencies to conduct research for them. Now, clients come in all shapes and sizes. So there can be insights departments within big companies, and these are usually more research savvy, so you'll be speaking almost the same language with them. Or they're completely new to the field of research. They just come to you and they say, oh, I just want to find out all about this, and that's it. They don't know anything else. Now, to give you some examples, one of the biggest clients that I worked for this year was brands all over the world, and their insights department sits at the intersections of all these brands. So that small team of people was responsible for generating research about their entire customer base. So that's a very research savvy type of client. At the other extreme, probably the smallest client that I've worked for was an owner of a pharmacy who wanted to open another pharmacy in a town in the south of England, and he just wanted to test the market to see whether there was any appetite for that. And then you have a whole spectrum of types of clients in between. So they can vary a lot depending on the company that they represent. What's also worth mentioning is that clients themselves can also conduct market research. So for example, there are really big brands like supermarket brands like of Tesco and so on, who have their own panels of consumers. So consumers sign up with them to take part in smaller research projects. And if they have any ideas that they want to test, they sometimes go directly to their own panel rather than commissioning research to agencies. Or there are, again, bigger brands, and imagine like online stores for the likes of ASOS and so on, that sit on so much data that they have internal data analytics departments that basically analyze that data and generate insights. So that's an example of clients conducting their own research. And similarly, in governmental institutions, you have people who are placed in certain research departments, and they can do that research themselves. When they do commission research, though, they go to research suppliers, and that's where we at Mustard sit. So research suppliers can either be full-service agencies, so they're involved in the research process from the very beginning until the very end, and I'll walk you through that research process in a second. Or they can be specialist agencies, either specialized in a particular sector, using a particular method, or they come in at a certain point in that research process because they're more like consultants on a particular matter. When we're commissioned to do research, if we can't do everything in-house, we very often go to fieldwork suppliers. So we partner up with them to take care of the fieldwork aspect. For example, if we know that we have a qualitative project coming up where we have to conduct interviews or we have to do focus groups with consumers or with businesses, we would normally design a recruitment screener where we outline the criteria and the profiles of people that we're looking for. And instead of recruiting them ourselves, we would go to a recruitment agency that is specialized for recruitment for market research, and they would find those people themselves. Equally, if we have an online survey that we want to send to the general population, we would go to an online panel provider. So these are companies where a lot of people just sign up to take part in research. We design that survey in such a way that we outline very strict profiling criteria, we have very strict quotas in place, and then we deploy the survey through the panel provider, and then they take care of collecting the data. Equally, if we have to conduct what's called a CATI study, or a computer-assisted telephone interviewing study, we would go to a fieldwork supplier that has a CATI unit, and then again, they script the survey, and their team of interviewers does the whole job for us, and they collect the data. Equally, if there's a lot of data that we have to process, we sometimes go again to fieldwork suppliers. I've worked on a project, on a multi-market quant study, where we had tens of thousands of verbatim comments that needed coding. And if we had done that ourselves, it would have been an incredible waste of internal resources. So we went to a data processing company, and they did the coding for us. So that's another example where you can use a fieldwork supplier. Equally, if we have data tables that need running, we tend to do those in-house, but we sometimes ask our panel providers to run the tables for us. So we design what's called the Table Specification, where we explain how we want to look at the data. So we have a massive spreadsheet with a lot of, we call them cross breaks at the top, which are segments that allow us to look at the data in various ways. And then we sometimes get our panel providers to do those for us. So these are just a few examples of ways in which you can use fieldwork suppliers. And obviously, probably the most important link of this chain is our research participants. They're heavily involved in market research, obviously. Depending on the project, they can be customers of our clients, in which case we would reach them through lists provided by our clients, provided that people gave their agreement to take part in market research or to be contacted by researchers. Or they can be people from the general population, in which case we'd go to our fieldwork suppliers to reach them. Now, we obviously have to abide by very strict data protection regulations. I know that this year we've all been through the craze of GDPR, but what I want to state is that we've been following very strict rules ever since market research started. So yeah, GDPR was a big thing, but there's always been rules and regulations in place to make sure that we always get informed consent, we always safeguard anonymity, we always keep things confidential, and so on. So there's very strict rules in place that we need to follow. At Mustard, we do a lot of international research as well. So last year alone, I think we conducted research in 73 countries. So beyond the data protection regulations, there's also a lot of cultural implications that we need to be aware of. There's only a few markets where we can say that we are the experts. So in that case, we go back again to fieldwork suppliers or even research suppliers, and we work with local agencies, with local moderators that give us more guidance about how people do research in other markets. And obviously, if we have to conduct research with children, with teens, with vulnerable groups, there are additional measures in place that we need to follow. So these are really the main groups involved in market research. The more the industry progresses, the more you'll see these changing. Like, for example, we have graphic designers who are coming in more and more in market research because people are aware that you need to communicate insights visually. Artificial intelligence and technology will probably have a massive role to play in reshaping this structure here. But at the moment, the way things are, these are the 4 core groups involved in market research. And you can work in either of them depending on your interests. So now that I told you who is involved in market research, I want to talk you through the research process that we normally go through as a full service research agency. And it all starts when we receive a brief. So a prospective client, they've identified an area that they want to research or a problem that needs fixing, and they put together a fieldwork brief that they send to us. That fieldwork brief will normally have some background information about the client, an overarching research objective, or a list of research questions that they need answering. They will sometimes say what their preferred method is, obviously who they want to conduct research with, and there will also be an indication of timings and, most importantly, budget. There will always be something mentioned about the budget. They'll either say you have 30K, 150K, or we don't know yet what the budget is, but we want your guidance on this. So the budget is a big one that will have an important role in deciding what methods to use and so on. So after acknowledging the brief, depending on the sector, depending on the topic, we put together a team of people and we start brainstorming ideas for the approach. At this stage, as we review the brief, if we think that we need more information from the client and we have more questions, we put together a list of these questions and we send it back to the client, because in this process, what's really important is that we have all the information that we need to write the best research proposal that will convince them to commission the work to us. And that takes me to the next step, which is writing the proposal. And this is really our chance to demonstrate that we are the experts and we need to work with that particular client. So what we normally do here is we talk a little bit about our understanding of the brief and of their objectives. So instead of reiterating their own research questions, we would tend to write our own understanding of those research questions. We would also use any kind of market or trends information that we have and that will help us contextualize the research. We would obviously go in a lot of detail talking about the methodology that we want to use. We'll talk about the outputs that we'll deliver, whether is it a PowerPoint report, is it a Word report, is it a video, is it an infographic. We need to tell them how we're going to approach this stage of the process. And then we also talk about timings and budgets. Now, as I said earlier, it's often clients say, oh, we would like to use this methodology. But if in this process we think that, well, hold on a minute, actually there's another method that we think will work much better than your proposed one, then we wouldn't shy away from challenging the brief and suggesting a better method instead. It happened often that clients come to us and say, oh, I want to do 4 focus groups with these categories of people. And there was an instance when we actually said, well, you're going to get more if you conduct a 2 weeks online community with this kind of people instead of 4 focus groups. And I'll give you an example of when that happened. Once we submit the proposal, there's always a waiting time, and you really hope for the best. Some clients also shortlist agencies, and they invite them for a pitch or a presentation, which is, again, an opportunity where you have to demonstrate that you're the chosen one for the project. And if you've demonstrated all these things, you then win the project, which is usually followed by a happy dance in the office, but also by a slight moment of panic that's like, oh God, we now have to do what we said we were going to do. So once the panic goes away, that's when the design and planning process starts. So we normally have a very detailed briefing call with the client, or briefing meeting, where we would revise the timeline if we have to. We would go again through the objectives of the research. We'd ask them to prepare any internal hypothesis that they have about the subject. They would also share with us any kind of information that will help us even more to contextualize the results better. And once we do that, we then start designing the research materials. So if we're talking about a qualitative project, we design the recruitment screener, the discussion guides, any stimulus materials that we're going to use. If it's a quant project involved, we design the questionnaire. We factor in any statistical exercises that we want to conduct. And at this stage, there's a lot of back and forth between agency and client, because clients are heavily involved in the design of these materials, and ultimately they have to sign off whatever materials we end up using when we apply the methodology. At this point, we also get in touch with those fieldwork suppliers that we're planning on using, and we make sure that everything is ready to go, especially if there is a face-to-face element involved, so especially if we have to book any venues or any viewing facilities, or if we have to book any travel, if it's international research, and so on. So at this point, we do all the prep work to then make sure that we have everything ready for the next stage, which is the data collection. And that's where we apply the methods that we agreed on with the client. And I'll go through all those methods in a second. Now, once the data collection process has ended, there's an absolutely crucial step that we all have to go through, and that's cleaning the data and preparing it for the analysis stage. For example, if it's an online study that we did, we have to go through the data, sense check it, remove any speeders, which is basically people who go through a survey very, very quickly just to get their incentive from the panel provider. So we take those out. Now we also have to remove bot-generated responses, because yes, they've been invading our surveys as well. So we have to take those out too. If we've done interviews or focus groups, we have to send the recordings to be transcribed. So we really have to do all the prep work. We have to run our tables, check everything, that the data is displayed correctly, to then make sure we have everything ready for what for me is my favorite part of the job, which is the analysis, storyboarding, and report writing. So the reason why I say that this is my favorite part of the job is that you're faced with an absolutely massive spreadsheet full of percentages or a massive pile of transcripts, and you have to make sense of it all. Like, you have to bring it all together. And that's the most draining but equally rewarding process that you can go through when you work in an agency, for me at least, because you're making sense of that data and coming out of this process with a good story to tell. That for me is absolutely priceless. And it's always, you have to always go back to your research objectives. You have to make sure that you're going back to your client with a story that actually answers their research questions, not really a story that you thought was interesting in the data. So there's a lot of cleaning in the storytelling process as well. Once the report is ready, we go to our clients, or we speak with them on the phone. Report with them, and if they're happy, then we celebrate that we've completed a project successfully. Obviously, we've done the debrief very often, depending on how many people in the room and how research savvy they are. They will also want you to dig even deeper in the data and give them even more responses. So I probably should have added that there's a bit of a back and forth at the end here to make sure that they have everything as well. Now, it's important to say that In a full service agency, from the moment you win the project until you celebrate, there's usually between 6 to 8 weeks. There's never, I mean, I'm not going to say there's never, obviously with more complex projects that involve international work, you can spend more time on a project, but normally there's such a quick turnaround in an agency that you really have to work under pressure, knowing that the deadline is just around the corner. And we've even had to turn around projects much quicker, like in maybe 2 or 3 weeks when the clients come to you and they say, oh, we need to do these focus groups quickly. And budget is a huge, has a huge implication here, because there's obviously deadline for clients to go through their budgets as well. So it happens that whenever they have a few, like a small sum of money left, they want to spend that on research very quickly. So yeah, I think that the general gist here is that it's a very quick turnaround. Now, depending whether it's consumer research or B2B research, these are generally the areas where our projects fall into. So we do a lot of customer satisfaction or customer experience research, and very often we combine that with brand research. To give you an example, a few weeks ago I finished a project for a pizza restaurant where we, so firstly the client was interested in understanding everything related to customer satisfaction. What did people like when they were in the restaurant? What did they dislike? Were there any areas that needed improvement? So anything related to customer experience itself. But the way we designed research materials, we also combined that with brand research, and we added questions about brand awareness, the people's perceptions of the brand, what they were associating the brand with. So our aim for that part of the project was to really understand whether what the brand was promising to stand for, so their vision, their value, whether that was cutting through in the experience of their customers and overall in the general market. So that's an example of a project where we combined these types of research. We do a lot of UNA studies as well, which stands for usage and attitudes. And that usually happens when if a client has a new product that they want to bring to the market, before they test the actual product, they take a step back and they test what people are currently doing. So what are their behaviors, what are their needs, what gaps do people think there are in the market, to be able to then position their product better. So on a project that I worked on last year, it was for a manufacturer of washroom accessories. So that's soap dispensers and hand dryers and taps and so on. And they wanted to speak with architects and specifiers in France to understand, okay, what design are you using, what products, who are your suppliers, how do you go through this process? And that project helped us understand the gaps in the French market where the client could then position their product. And normally a UNA study is then followed by proposition or concept testing or innovation and new product development. And that's usually when you have a concept or you have a product and then you want to test it with the market to see how it's received. And I'll give you 2 examples here. I worked on a project for a manufacturer of chewy sweets here in the UK. And they wanted to bring on the market a healthier type of sweet, so a sweet that would count as one of your 5 a day. So we had to conduct focus groups with consumers, and we ended up testing, I think, 10 different types of sweets. So you can only imagine in 90 minutes the sugar levels that were in the room. But that's an example of a project where you actually test the product and you go back to the client and you say it was received well or it needs improving on taste, texture, and so on. We also do, we combine brand research with stakeholder engagement as well. And by stakeholder engagement, I mean that we engage with a wider set of audiences. So for a gas supplier that's based in the UK, but it has a wider European reach, we conducted a study and we spoke with their customers, we spoke with their prospects, so the general market, but we also spoke with their staff members. And we did that, we engaged with all the people that had a role in the business because we wanted to see overall how was that brand performing. Or on another project for a housing association that wanted to develop their propositions for a retirement village, we spoke with the residents of their retirement village. with the general population, with their stakeholders within the housing association. So that's when you want to make sure that you've covered all the audiences, because somebody might have something different to say, and you need to take that into account when it comes to developing a proposition. And finally, because we're aware of how important data is nowadays, we now have a sister company called Honeycomb, and they do a mix of data science and market research. So any project that involves a segmentation or data analytics, they would take care of that for us. Oh, and another example of concept testing was, we did a project once with a like an app developer. They had an app that you could use if you were like a foreigner, like I am, and you don't speak the language of the country. You could, and you wanted to go to the cinema, you could install the app on your phone, and it would dub the film. Like you would put the headphones on and you would listen to that movie, you watch that movie in your native language. So we went to London and we went to Paris, and we recruited people from all over the world, and we asked them to watch a movie. It was a rubbish movie, but that's another story. They used the app in the cinema, and then we sent them an online survey on their mobiles right after the movie had ended to see how it all went. So that's another type of innovation or concept testing project. Now, depending on the brief that we receive and the budget that we have, and obviously the research objectives, the audiences involved, there's a wide array of methods that we can choose. And these are some examples of methods that we've been using at Mustard. So, and also it often happens, or at least lately, I don't know what it was, but it often happens that we mix qual and quant methods in the same project. So because we're aware of the increasing role that technology plays in our lives and in the way people communicate, we now have more online platforms that we're using. So we're using online communities. We have our own mobile qualitative app called Pickles, and I'll talk about that as well. We also have to make sure that all our online surveys are always mobile compatible as well. Because we really want to make it as easy as possible for people to take part in research, but we also want to get to that in the moment, unfiltered, raw feedback that they have to whatever we're testing. So an online methods are really helping us to do that. Depending on the project, we can also do ethnography or immersion. We can do observations, customer walkthroughs, or we call them assisted shops. So if we have projects for where we test, like in the retail sector, we sometimes accompany customers as they're shopping to really be there with them in the moment and look at what at how their decision-making process looks like, because there's quite a big difference between what they would say in a focus group would do when they're right there choosing their products from the aisle. I've mentioned before, we tend to do a lot of CATI studies as well. If we want to get reactions as people are experiencing things, or at the end of an experience, we would send a team of interviewers to do what's called intercepts or exit interviews via, CAPI stands for computer-assisted personal interviewing, but we basically send them with an iPad or a tablet, and they do the interview then and there. And I put in self-completion surveys here, but I can't even remember the last time we've as a method. It just seems that it's slowly fading out from from the methods that we use. And just to finish off this section, when you work in an agency, it's never just one project that you're working on. It's never just one method or one sector. On a good day, you'd have 4 projects going on at the same time in different stages of the research process that you have to turn around very quickly. So it's really working under pressure and multitasking, and as I said here, wearing different hats is quite crucial when you work in an agency. Now, in the time I have left, I just quickly want to talk you through some of the case studies that I prepared. And what's been so far, I think, the highlight of my research career was when we were commissioned to conduct customer satisfaction and proposition testing in the Dominican Republic. And this happened this summer. So we were commissioned by, the client was managing an all-inclusive themed resort in Punta Cana. And they wanted to do two things. They wanted to understand how people were experiencing the resort, what they liked, what they disliked, what they had to improve. And in order to meet that objective, we used a quant method. So we did intercept interviews via copy. And we did those in English and in Spanish. And it was actually me and a colleague of mine who traveled to Punta Cana and did them. And I know that initially I said that we very often work with fieldwork suppliers, but in this case, it was much more valuable for the research, and it turned out to be more cost-effective for us to travel there than to use a local agency. And I mean, it was being for 7 days in an all-inclusive resort in the Dominican Republic. We didn't really want to miss out on that opportunity, so of course we went. The second objective that we had, the client had a few concepts, a few ideas that they wanted to add to the experience, but they really weren't sure which ones they wanted to add. So they wanted us to test them with the guests to see what people like and what people dislike. And what we did to meet that objective, we conducted focus groups to test these new ideas. So we had lots of stimulus material that we had to show people and to test those. Now, because we were there for 7 days, there was a huge immersion and observation element involved here. So it was almost all the time we were with our notepads taking notes about everything that was going on. If people were telling us about certain things in the interviews, we were always going to double check or to take photos to capture as much material as possible to help us contextualize the results back to the client. There was a huge logistical element involved here as well, whereas usually we work with recruitment agencies to find the right participants. We obviously couldn't, it would have been super expensive to find people and recruit them to go on holiday for 7 days in the Dominican Republic, so who does that? So we had to go through the recruitment process ourselves right there. So what we did was we had our own mustard branded t-shirts, which you can see us wearing here, and we had a message on the back that said, "Researcher, come talk to me." And almost daily we had timed walks around the resort so that people could see us, and that nudged them into coming to talk to us. We had these research cards where we talked about all the information about the research. We added a QR code to that so they can sign it and go to the website with more information. And we were stationed in various areas of the resort. And because for this particular client, the way we presented the results was very important, what we did, we used Vox Pops as a communication method. So at the end of the interview, we asked people for their approval to be video recorded, answering 2 questions: what's working, what's not working. And we did that. We captured a lot of material, and we did that to put together a short video that the client then disseminated with their own stakeholders. So that's one example where we did this mix of qual and quant. Another project that I want to talk to you about was a project that we did for the Greater Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership, so a public sector client, who commissioned us last year to conduct research. The objective was to provide actionable insights to help and inform future strategy as they strive to reduce adult smoking by 1/3 over the next 4 years. And this is an example of a situation where when we challenged the brief. Because in the brief they said, we want to do, I think it was 18 focus groups or something like that with people from Greater Manchester. And we said, well, actually, you'll get better results and far richer insight if you do an online community. And we convinced them to do that. So what we did in this project, we started with, I think we did 16 phone depths with smokers and ex-smokers to really test the waters and to really help us capture some data to inform the discussion guide for the online community. And then we had an online community that lasted for 4 weeks. We recruited 94 people in total, and at the end of that, 80 people completed all 13 topics. And the way so these are some screenshots of how our online community works. So we basically have a discussion guide for each week of the online community, and we separate the research objectives into these discussion weeks. And the beauty of this method is that it really allows people to take part in research from the comfort of their own home, from the comfort of wherever. If they're doing a long commute and they have nothing to do, they can take part in research. If they're at home, they can do that. So it's a way of us going to them rather than asking them to come to us. You can also test so many different types of materials. For this project, we had posters, video campaigns, radio ads. So there was a lot of testing involved, and you can easily do that in an online community. And probably the best thing about it is it allows for so much flexibility. So what we had in week 4, in the discussion guide in week 4, we actually never ended up doing what we said we were going to do initially. Because the way the research was going and the insight was generated, we had to adapt and change our approach. And you can never do that within the confines of a focus group that only lasts for 90 minutes. So this is a great platform that gave us over 2 hours of consultation time with each participant. So if you think of a focus group, you have 90 minutes, sometimes 120 minutes, with 8 to 10 people. But in this case, we have over 2 hours with 80 people in 4 weeks. That's a lot. Just to give you an idea of the community in numbers, this is what we had. So at the end of the community, we had like a proper novel about smoking in Greater Manchester, so over 600 pages and over 1,400 individual responses. So a huge, huge amount of data. To add to that, what we also did, we did consultations with young people. So we went to youth centers across Greater Manchester, and we spoke with young people about their smoking behavior. And then we were again confronted with this absolutely humongous set of data. And what really helped us make sense of it all was we used the behavioral economics framework. So we looked at the emotional self and the rational self and how each of these interact within each individual and how they impact their decision-making process, their behaviors. And using this approach, we ended up designing 4 different typologies of smokers that then our client could target separately in very bespoke ways, if you'd like. So this was, again, one of the best projects that I've worked on so far because of the, everything that it involved, and I think probably also because of that process of making sense of all the data that we collected. And the last one that I want to talk about is, very quickly, so I said earlier that we developed our own mobile qualitative app, which is called Pickles. We did that is, it's really everybody is on their phone nowadays. So we decided to do this because it really allows us to reach a wide variety of people, including those that will struggle coming to a focus group. And the difference between Pickles and an online community is Pickles is an app. It has push notifications, and you can get people to do things then and there, compared to an online community where they're notified about a new discussion topic via email, and they don't, there isn't that instant access to respondents, if you'd like. So what we did, these were some trials that we did. For example, when Pets at Home ran a new TV ad, we recruited a group of people. They've installed the app on their phones, and we were having moderated discussions with them as they were watching the TV ad. So we really had access to that instant reaction to what they were seeing on TV. We did another project for Next with the occasion of Mother's Day, where we wanted to look at the intended purchases and the real purchases that they had. So we had discussions with them first when they were at home or someplace else about what they wanted to buy for Mother's Day. And then we sent them on like a shopping mission to buy a gift. And we were there with them. Like, we were talking to them as they were buying things, and we were able to see that, well, actually what they said that they were going to buy, they ended up not doing that because of the context of being in a shop. So that was quite interesting to see as well. We used it for Golden Fry as well, where we observed people as they were cooking meals in their home. So we asked them to take photos of their cupboards to show us the ingredients that they were using. And it's so rich in footage that you then go back to your client with responses and with photos from respondents themselves instead of photo from Google. So that's really rich because it really helps us bring research and results to life. And it's also easy to use with hard-to-reach audiences. So we did it with MPS, which is a provider of medical indemnity. So we worked with consultants working in the NHS, and these are very, very busy people. So it's very difficult to get them to do research. But because we had like short diary exercises on pickles, we got to them, and we got a lot of insight from them because of how they were using the app. So these are just a few examples of how you can use a mobile app. And just very briefly, I want to show you some examples of outputs that we delivered to our clients without going into too much detail. Froze. Yeah, it's not working. Right, so what I had prepared, right, there it is. So we're very rarely bound by a certain template that we need to use with our reports. So we're trying to make things as visual as possible because this is how we communicate the story back to the client. We don't go with a bunch of data sets. We go with the story, and how that story is presented is quite crucial. So we always try to make it more infographic-y and more interactive and more engaging. And what we've been doing as well, we use videos more and more. So we collect vox pops during field work, and then we put them together in a visual and animated way for the client. So an example would be this one, where we had an online community for Tangle Teaser, which is the manufacturer of hairbrushes. And this is a video of a person as she's dancing as she's using the hairbrush. So for the client to see that, that's a much more personal way to present the insights rather than in a text box with a bunch of information. And we also did a similar thing when Pokemon Go was a thing. So we went out to the streets in Manchester, and we spoke to people to see what it was all about. And I want to finish off. I know I told you about how hardworking we are in an agency, but it comes with a lot of perks as well. So you do get to work for some amazing clients, and these are just a few examples of clients that I worked on. So both public sector, private sector, and you actually get to see how you're making changes. Like the products that you tested, you end up seeing them on the aisle, or the recommendations that you made, you end up seeing them in practice. So that's quite cool. You also get to travel. These are some of the places that I've been to last year, and I think the highlight beyond Punta Cana was we went to see our client and to present our findings in Times Square in New York, and that was the most surreal experience I have ever had. And at Muster, we also go abroad for our Christmas parties, so that's cool as well. And your finger is always on the pulse. Like, no matter what you do, you're always there. You always know what people think, you know what they do. You're in the same house with them when you use pickles, or you're always there, and you know how people's thoughts are and perceptions are changing. You're always working with innovative methods. We have to constantly keep up with consumers or with societal trends because they're moving quicker than we are. And you always learn. There's continuous learning. There's always new methods or new ways that you can do research in. So that for me is another advantage. So this takes me to the end of my presentation. So thank you. I know it was slightly longer than 40 minutes. Thank you.